Hi everyone, and welcome to this first video that focuses on the coursework section of the A-Level English Language course. Now, just for clarity, I've highlighted here which courses this video applies to, and it's any way you're asked to read a text and then write your own piece using the techniques, writing styles, or the subject content that you've seen in your chosen text, before then writing up a commentary to explain your research and your own writing. As you can see, this video applies to anyone doing the Edexcel language or the literature and language course. It can also be relevant to either AQA course, although if you're on the combined you might want to just speak to your teachers before reading any of the books mentioned to check if they're focusing on a specific topic, and it also applies to the AQA combined course as well. So in this video I'm going to be talking you through 4 different non-fiction texts that I've recommended to students in the past and focus in on some of the language techniques we can see in each one, which is a useful practice before writing and when making notes for the commentary section of your coursework. This is also useful as revision of language techniques for any unseen texts that you get in other aspects of the course. So the first text I like to look at with my students is Adam Kay's This Is Going to Hurt, which has also recently been turned into a BBC One series. So here you can see the blurb for his book. Scribbled in secret after endless days, sleepless nights and missed weekends, comedian and former junior doctor Adam Kay's This Is Going to Hurt provides an essential, brutally frank account of what life is like for NHS workers. This Is Going to Hurt is an unmissable window into Britain's ailing health system and the lives of the people who are its lifeblood. And I'd recommend this text in particular to anyone who's particularly interested in writing something satirical, some form of reportage, or anything where you're discussing a serious topic but in a humorous way. Let's look at the opening chapter of this text. So chapter 1, House Officer. The decision to work in medicine is basically a version of the email you get in early October asking you to choose your menu options for the work Christmas party. No doubt you'll choose the chicken to be on the safe side, and it's more than likely everything will be alright. But what if someone shares a ghastly factory farming video on Facebook the day before and you inadvertently witness a mass debeaking? What if Morrissey dies in November and out of respect for him, you turn your back on a lifestyle thus far devoted almost exclusively to consuming meat? What if you develop a life-threatening allergy to escalopes? Ultimately, no one knows what they'll fancy for dinner in 60 dinners' time. Every doctor makes their career choice age 16, 2 years before they're legally allowed to text a photo of their own genitals. When you sit down and pick your A-levels, you're set off on a trajectory that continues until you either retire or die, and, unlike your work Christmas party, Janet from procurement won't swap your chicken with her halloumi skewers. You're stuck with it. So, what I love about this style of writing, and why I often see it get high marks when it's replicated by students, is all the techniques that are used here to create this humour, but that underneath that it's dealing with actually a very serious topic. So what techniques can we see? Well, the most obvious one is this extended metaphor that he uses throughout. You've got him comparing being a doctor or becoming a doctor to ordering a Christmas meal in October. It's incredibly easy to understand by anyone, and it gets his point and the critique of the medical system across straight away. This metaphor is then interlaced with a rhetorical question, which then takes the metaphor one step further in its absurdity, and it continues in building that humour. A key part of your writing is to create a really clear voice, and we see that through quite specific contextual references. We've got one here to the singer Morrissey, and then you've got this choice of name and job title at the bottom, Janet from procurement. Again, to me, just gave off this very British sounding text, which works perfectly for the context of this being a junior doctor discussing his attitude to the NHS. Then I've also picked out this line, they're legally allowed to text a photo of their own genitals, which again adds to the humour of this piece by making a comparison which could shock the reader and give a sense that this is going to be a very blunt and honest piece of writing. So one to consider if you think that you could write in a similar writing style. Now moving on to a very different type of text. Here we have a piece of travel writing, and again just reading that blurb. In 1995, before leaving England to move back to the States, Bill Bryson insisted on taking one last trip around Britain. His aim was to take stock of the nation's public face and private parts and to analyse what precisely it was he loved so much about England. Notes from a Small Island was a huge #1 bestseller when it was first published and has become the nation's most loved book about Britain, going on to sell over 2 million copies. Now, Bill Bryson is a favourite among English teachers and is one of the potential prescribed texts by AQA for the coursework. So again, it's best to check with your teacher if you are with AQA before purchasing this book. And I would say this text is great for anyone that's thinking of doing travel writing, anyone that's looking to write a really descriptive piece of non-fiction, and it's a good example of someone using more traditional language techniques. Again, let's have a read of a short extract from this book. Before long, the white cliffs of Dover rose from the sea and began creeping towards us, and in no time at all, it seemed, we were sailing into Dover harbour and clumsily nuzzling up to the dock, as a disembodied voice instructed foot passengers to assemble at the starboard egress point on deck ZX2 by the Sunshine Lounge, as if that meant anything to anybody. We all embarked on long, befuddled, highly individual explorations of the ship, up and down stairways, through the cafeteria and club class lounge, in and out of storerooms, through a kitchen full of toiling lascars, back through the cafeteria from another angle, and finally, without knowing quite how, out into the welcoming, watery sunshine of England. I was eager to see Dover again after all these years. I strode into the centre along Marine Parade, and with a small cry of pleasure, spied the shelter I'd slept in those many years ago. It was covered in about 11 more layers of bile green paint, but otherwise unchanged. The view out to the sea was likewise unchanged, though the water was bluer and more glittery than when I'd last seen it. But everything else looked different. Where I recalled there being a row of elegant Georgian terraces, there was now a vast and unbecoming brick apartment block. Now, very different to the K-text, and perhaps on a first read, a less obvious use of techniques, but they are in here. We start with this discourse marker before long to move the text along, before going into this personification of the cliffs of Dover, making them sound almost menacing, I would argue, where you've got the word creeping and you've got this phrase rose from the sea. But maybe you might read that in a different way. Then we have a huge amount of post and pre-modified noun phrases, which is something that is very typical of the travel writing genre, as you have to be able to really set that scene. Some of my favourites here being the bile green paint, which gets across Bryson's disdain for this. And then you've got this last line, the vast and unbecoming brick apartment block. Apartment, I think, as well, being something that subtly hints towards the fact that this is an American writer and American culture, as I would probably more likely call this a block of flats instead of an apartment. Then the last thing I've picked out here, and this is very important if you're thinking of doing a piece of travel writing, is the subject-specific lexis. So here we have mention of things specifically to do with a ship. You've got the starboard egress point, you've got lascars, and then here we have specific mentions to the place that he's going. So you've got Dover, Marine Parade, Georgian terraces. So if you want to do travel writing, you'll need to do a bit of research into the specifics of the place you want to write about as well. The next writer I want to look at, and I'm sure a lot of you have come across him before, is Charlie Brooker. Now, in some courses, your star models can just be articles, which Brooker is most famous for. Other courses ask for you to read a specific book with an ISBN number, and this combines the two. I Can Make You Hate is a collection of television presenter and journalist Charlie Brooker's columns from The Guardian written between August 2009 and July 2012, where he pokes fun at all manner of targets, from politicians, other newspapers like the Daily Mail, and the stars of reality television. Now, in a lot of ways, Brooker is quite similar to Kay. You could even read both if you're interested in this style of writing, but his is better for articles that are taking on the form of a rant, and they can be on any topic rather than something serious like Kay's work. So I picked the opening to one of the articles featured in his book, which is called Going Live and is from 2010. So the other day I had to appear on live television several times throughout the evening as the polls closed and the votes were counted, and my guts turned to cold cream. Not because of the exit poll, although that was pretty depressing, but because appearing on live television is so profoundly scary. Since most of my contributions were pre-recorded, I didn't have to do much except turn up, state my name and introduce some VTs, but nevertheless the fact remains that you, sir, are on live television. And this does very strange things to your brain. Having lived through this experience, I can now only assume that every single one of the nation's favourite live telly faces has the ice-blooded psychotic personality of a long-range military sniper. That nice Christine Bleakley, bet she could emotionally blast a hole through your forehead while linking to a report on wind farms. On the morning itself I was fine. I'd been up at 5 AM in an edit suite where we were cutting one of the VT packages I'd written. To make 2 of them, totalling just over 8 minutes, took roughly 40 hours. Viewers, of course, are blissfully unaware of the slog involved, and often assume it takes as long to create something as it does to watch it. Therefore, I was too knackered to really think about the live aspect of the live show I was taking part in. It was only during a cautionary pre-broadcast talk from the lawyer that it began to sink in. The lawyer's job is to remind you not to say anything libelous or illegal while the camera's pointing at you, because, you know, it's live. As he ran through an exhaustive list of things that could go potentially wrong, my mind began to cry. So what I love about Brooker's style is the amount of spoken language features that we see in his writing, which gives him a really clear sense of voice. Here we have discourse markers to help structure his text. You've got "so the other day," and then you've got this use of parenthesis to add this kind of chatty voice and this kind of informal lexis, like in this example, because, you know, it's live, that we've got down here. Then we've also got this more traditional use of metaphors. You've got "my guts turned to cold cream" and "my mind began to cry." I like the feeling of immaturity we get with this metaphor too, and it really fits with the kind of situation that he's describing. Then we have this hyperbolic language used here for comedic effect, and over-the-top comparison, which, if you've seen Brooker on TV, you'll know fits with his style of speaking. And then finally, we've got another cultural reference, one to Christine Bleakley, who was a TV presenter, she still is, but it's perhaps one that's a little bit more outdated now, which again gives a sense of the time period this was written in, and again shows that this is from a British writer. Now we come on to the final text, and this one I think is very different to the first 3, more relevant to those who prefer writing about serious topics, perhaps reportage or a memoir, and has a much subtler way of using techniques. So this is Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell. It's a searing and painfully honest account of his experience as a police officer in Imperial Burma, killing an escaped elephant in front of a crowd solely to avoid looking a fool. Opinionated, uncompromising, provocative, and hugely entertaining, all the essays in this book show Orwell's unique ability to get to the heart of any subject. So this is from a section of his essay called Shooting an Elephant. It's not the opening, but it is a section which includes some techniques you may want to incorporate into your writing. One day something happened which in a roundabout way was enlightening. It was a tiny incident in itself, but it gave me a better glimpse than I had had before of the real nature of imperialism, the real motives for which despotic governments act. Early one morning, the sub-inspector at a police station, the other end of the town, rang me up on the phone and said that an elephant was ravaging the bazaar. Would I please come and do something about it? I did not know what I could do, but I wanted to see what was happening, and I got onto a pony and started out. I took my rifle, an old .44 Winchester, and much too small to kill an elephant, but I thought the noise might be useful in terrorism. Various Burmans stopped me on my way and told me about the elephant's doing. It was not, of course, a wild elephant, but a tame one which had gone must. It had been chained up, as tame elephants always are when their attack of must is due, but on the previous night it had broken its chain and escaped. Its mahout, the only person who could manage it when it was in that state, had set out in pursuit, but had taken the wrong direction and was now 12 hours' journey away, and in the morning the elephant had suddenly reappeared in the town. The Burmese population had no weapons and were quite helpless against it. It had already destroyed somebody's bamboo hut, killed a cow and raided some fruit stalls and devoured the stock. Also, it had met the municipal rubbish van, and when the driver jumped out and took to its heels, had turned the van over and inflicted violences upon it. So the first thing I've noted here is where we have the writer's opinion, which may seem like something that all the texts do, but because of the seriousness of this topic and the political content, I think it's relevant here that he's using this situation to give his opinion on imperialism, and the motives of what he calls despotic governments, which again is a nice bit of vocabulary as well. Then, like with Bryson, we've got subject-specific lexis used throughout this piece, which shows that if you were to write something in this style, you really need to do your research before and know what you're talking about. A third technique I've picked out is this use of second or reported voice coming through, showing the politeness of the people here and then also the desperation here, and perhaps shows how they see Orwell as a figure who can help. And finally, I've identified that we have a semantic field of destruction developing throughout this section of the text. You've got words like ravaging, you've got destroyed, you've got devoured, all helping to create this image of this animal which is far more powerful than the people. As you can see, these are more subtle techniques than the other texts we've looked at, so you may need to work harder to make sure you're really showing off your writing style if you do decide to do something like this, but it can be done. So those are 4 texts that you might want to consider looking at as potential star models for your coursework. And after you've chosen to read a book, the next thing to do is just have a go at writing something and see how it goes. Thank you for watching this video.